Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our next to the last installment in our 2022 Sotterley Presents People and Perspectives. My name is Nancy Easterling. It is my honor to serve as the Executive Director at Historic Sotterley. Excuse the background. I'm doing this from my office tonight, so now you all get to see just how messy I am. But luckily, you're not here to see me. You're here to see our incredible speaker tonight. We were so honored when she said that she would be here with us tonight. And I'm going to read her introduction in a moment, but I do want to say thank you to all of you who are joining us. Please do sign into the chat. We'd like to know where you're joining us from tonight. I've already seen people from California and New York. Some of our wonderful Sotterley descendants are on there, and so many other great friends. So sign into the chat. Also, just so that you're aware, in case you haven't been on Webinar Jam, this platform in a while, the chat button, as you can see off to the side, you can write and type into that. But if you'd like to do a question, there's another Q&A button. Anytime during the performance tonight, go ahead and type your question into the chat. We will get to as many questions as we can at the end. We are so grateful to all of our sponsors and our community partners who make this possible, and to all of our members and everybody who believes in the work we're doing. In particular, we do want to thank the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who gave Sotterley a Telling the Full History grant, which was incredible. We also want to give our thanks to Richard and Julia Moe for their support of the Common Ground programming, and to companies like Boeing, who particularly support us for our work in equity. This particular presentation tonight is part of our Common Ground initiative. And if you're not familiar with it, please do go onto our website. There was a wonderful video created about our descendants and our Common Ground programming that's on our Common Ground initiative page. We hope that you get a chance to look at that. So with no further ado, because I know you are all as excited as I am, and yes, I've read this book, and yes, I love this book, I want to introduce you to our incredible speaker tonight, who I've had so much fun talking with. I almost forgot to go live tonight. So Victoria Christopher Murray. She's a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of more than 30 novels. That is a lot of novels, including the New York Times instant bestseller, the book we're talking about tonight, The Personal Librarian. She's been writing novels full-time for over 20 years, even though she doesn't look old enough for that to be the case. A native New Yorker, Victoria attended the prestigious Hampton University in Virginia, where she majored in communication disorders, which I find just fascinating. After graduating, she attended New York University's Stern Business, where she received her MBA in marketing. Victoria spent 10 years in corporate America before she tested her entrepreneurial spirit. She opened a financial services agency for Aegon USA, where she managed the #1 division for 9 consecutive years. However, she always dreamed of writing, and in 1997, she pursued her dream. Like I said, you must have started when you were 2. That's all I can say. She originally self-published her first novel, Temptation, in 2000. Time Warner published that novel. Temptation made numerous bestseller lists and remained on the Essence bestsellers list for 9 consecutive months. Wow. In 2001, she received her first NAACP Image Award nomination for Temptation. Over her career, Victoria has received numerous awards, including the Phyllis Wheatley Trailblazer Award, 11 African American Literary Awards, and 5 NAACP Image Award nominations. In 2016, she won the Image Award for Outstanding Literature for her social commentary novel, Stand Your Ground. All 7 novels in Victoria's 7 Deadly Sins were optioned to become movies on Lifetime. The first 2, Lust and Envy, aired in April of 2021, and the next 2, Greed and Wrath, are in pre-production, will be airing. Did they air this spring? I didn't ask. It aired this spring in 2022. The movies were produced by T.D. Jakes, Sean Robinson, and Derek Williams. Another one of Victoria's novels, The X-Files, has also been optioned to become a movie and will begin filming this year. How exciting. With almost 2 million books in print, Victoria is one of the country's top African-American contemporary authors. We are so thrilled to start the conversation. So let's get going, Victoria. I can't wait for this. So she's much cuter than I am. So
you're so kind. You're so kind. But I'm so happy to be here with you.
This is going to be absolutely wonderful. There's so much to me that's so interesting about your background leading up to this. I mean, you attended an extremely prestigious HBCU and business school. So, at that point, where were you envisioning your future? Because I don't think you envisioned where you are today.
I've always wanted to be a writer. That's what came first. I, as a child, loved to read. And so I think what happens is that from reading, you go into writing. You want to be a writer. Oh, yeah. And I wrote my very first masterpiece when I was 7 years old. So a lot of people don't believe that you can write a masterpiece when you're 7. But you can if you plagiarize. I wrote something called Betty and the Witch. And it was about a little girl who wore a red uniform with a hood to school every day. She had 3 bears for brothers and 3 pigs for sisters. And how I remembered that was the bears were brothers and the 3 pigs were her sisters. And their next door neighbors, who were their best friends, were 7 little people. And there was even a good witch and a bad witch. But I wrote this story, I was very serious about it, and gave it to my parents. And my mom gave it to my teacher. And the entire 2nd grade ended up performing it as a play.
You're kidding me. Oh my God.
And what was happening at that point, I remember quite a few parts of that. Like, I remember her telling me that we were going to perform it. Then I remember being able to choose the role that I wanted because I wrote it. And I chose the witch, which said something about me as a 7-year-old. I don't know what it said, but that teacher validated. I didn't know that's what was happening, but validated my gift. And from that point forward, I wanted to be a writer. I just didn't know how to do it. I had never seen any writers. Definitely, even in the books I was reading, I never saw people that looked like me. So it was my dream, but I was raised in a household where education was so important. And if your parents were going to pay for college and grad school, that meant you had to go get a job at some point. And writing didn't seem like a job to me. So that's how I ended up going to Hampton and majoring in communication disorders. And the only reason I majored in communication disorders is I flipped through the catalog. You should not be asking 17-year-olds, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? And so I was just flipping through the catalog, and I was like, oh, I've heard of English, I've heard of math, I've heard of chemistry. I've never heard of communication disorders, so let me major in that. That's not the best way to choose a career. And so by the time I was graduating, I knew I had to do something, and that's when I decided to go get my MBA from Stern.
Oh my God, that is such a great story. I love that.
Yeah, that's my life. That's how I got here.
So 30 books. Where did you get your inspiration for your topics? And were you hoping to instill something in your readers when you chose these topics?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My inspiration I don't try to deliver a message. I try to tell a story. And what I find fascinating is that different people will get a different message from my stories. I always say that whatever they need meets them on the pages, and I don't have anything to do with it because people bring their own experiences and backgrounds and situations to reading. So I just try to tell a good story. And I get my ideas because to me, ideas and inspiration are 2 different things. So my ideas, I once heard Michael Jackson on a TV interview say that every song he was ever going to write was inside of him before he was born. And it was his job to get it out. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, Michael, you feel me, because I don't have to search for my story ideas. They're inside of me. I feel like they're inside already. And it's my job to pull them out. And one thing that's very interesting to me about pulling them out is that they grow, they're like flowers inside of me, and they grow at different speeds. And so there might be an idea that I had 10 years ago that's still trying to get watered and grow, and something I learned last week, that'll be the book for this week. So my ideas are already there. I don't know all of them ahead of time, but they're already there. And my inspiration comes from the fact that this is my career. And I have developed a great relationship with food and shelter. And I don't get to eat or to keep where I'm going to sleep unless I turn in a book. And so that contract really inspires you. This is my job, and I'm inspired by the fact that I love to eat and I kind of like where I live.
That is a really good inspiration. It's a good
That's my
inspiration for all of us. So this Personal Librarian, some of your other books are just traditional fiction.
Yes.
This was historical fiction. Have you written historical fiction before?
About 50 books a year. I love to read. And so I never thought I'm a contemporary writer.
So you mentioned Marie. Of course, I can't wait to meet her someday too. Just from us talking, I instantly love her. But yes. Tell me about how the premise for this book evolved and how you two came to collaborate on this book.
Yeah, came together. So Marie has been writing historical fiction, and many years she lived in New York, and she was an attorney. And she would always tell the story about she was not supposed to be an attorney. She had majored in history in college. And so what do you do with that degree? You become an attorney. But she said that she knew she did not want to stay an attorney. And she would wander around New York and visit a lot of the institutions. And she used to love to go to the J.P. Morgan Library, which if anybody's in New York and has seen it, it's just this 4-room jewel box. I mean, there's an extension to it now, but his office is preserved and Belle's office is there. And it's just beautiful. And she used to go and just sit in there and try to be inspired. And she met a docent one time who told her that this fabulous collection around her had not been put together by J.P. Morgan alone, that it was a woman who was responsible for this massive collection that he has. And it's interesting because like right now they have 3 Gutenbergs. They have thousands of pieces, but the 3 Gutenberg Bibles that they have are worth $1.5 billion alone. So Belle DeCosta Green put this together. So then when Marie started writing historical fiction, she really wanted to focus on women whose stories had been lost in the folds of history. And so she wrote about, several people, and she always wanted to come back to this woman, Belle DeCosta Green. And when she first heard about her, the docent did not tell Marie that Belle was Black, and Marie's not sure she knew at that time. That's how many years ago that she had been going to the J.P. Morgan Library. When Marie discovered that Belle was Black, she said that she felt like she could write fiction. She'd been doing a great job writing fiction, but she didn't feel like she could, nor should she, try to imagine what it would be like to be a Black woman in America. She couldn't imagine that today, certainly not 100 years ago. So she kept putting Belle to the side. And then she happened to read my novel, Stand Your Ground. And when she read that, which is a novel that I wrote about from the perspective of a Black woman and a white woman, and it's about a young Black teenager that gets shot by a white man. And it's about the Black mother and the white wife of the shooter and how their stories converge. And when Marie read that, she loved it. And she said she felt like I was doing what she was doing with her books. So she reached out to me through our agents, and she sent a proposal that was 3 pages single space. That becomes very important because it was just 3 pages, but it was single space. And my agent sent it to me, didn't tell me anything, just said, read this. It might be an interesting collaboration. The first thing I did was look up Marie because I hadn't heard of her. And I read about all these wonderful stories that she told. And but then I wondered if she had the right person, because I looked at her picture, looked at my picture, and I wondered if she was looking for a different Victoria Christopher Murray. But I said, okay, let me check out the proposal. Well, I could not get through the first pass. Costa Green was Black until she passed away. That's when I said, oh my God, let me get on board. So called Marie, and instantly we clicked, instantly. But the whole process of this book, being written during COVID, after George Floyd, so much happened after we said yes, we would agree to do it together.
You and I were talking before about the timing of this, because it comes out about a year after everything happened with George Floyd.
Yes.
And how much was your writing influenced by what was going on nationally? Even though you're writing a historical novel, how much were you influenced by that?
So very influenced. That's such a good question, because we were writing about something that took place 100 years, exactly 100 years ago. And, you know, one of the things about this book with Belle Costa Green, she came from this very prestigious Black family. Her father was the first Black man to graduate from Harvard. He was a civil rights activist who was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, very well spoken. He was probably more famous. And if he had had anyone to continue his legacy when he passed away, we would have known about him. She came from, her mother's side of the family had been free Blacks for generations. They were all educated. All the women were teachers. All the men were either doctors or engineers. So she came from this very prestigious family. And for Marie, it was difficult for her to understand the drive of her mother, of Belle's mother, wanting them to pass. It wasn't difficult for me because I had people in my family. My grandmother would pass for convenience, we would always say. And so, but when the George Floyd situation happened, I told Marie that this is what Belle's mother was doing. She wanted to make sure that none of her children ever ended up on the wrong side of a cop's knee. She just wanted to pass to protect her children, because the Civil Rights Act of 1875 had been overturned. The first Civil Rights Act of 1866 never even made it out, you know. And so there had been so many times when this country was trying to get it right. And Belle's mother, who had been in the civil rights fight for the Civil Rights Act of 1875, when it was overturned, she saw the writing on the wall and she said, no, we can't do this. And so during that time, it wasn't until Marie was able to actually see what happened to George Floyd, that she could understand the motivation behind Belle and her mother's decision to pass for white. And so we were using a situation that was contemporary, happening right in front of us, to explain what happened 100 years ago. And it was just it was almost surreal, because it made me believe, like, if Genevieve came back, Belle's mother, at 100 years, if she was here, she would say, I told you so.
I think you're probably right. You know, just there are going to be a few people out there, not many, who haven't read the book yet. And given us a little bit of a lead up, letting them know about the parent. Can you give a little bit more so people kind of know the premise of this book and how it kind of flows?
Yes. So this is the story of Belle DaCosta Green, as I've already said, who became one of the most powerful women in New York, especially in the art world, before women even had a chance to vote. She couldn't even vote, but she was more powerful than most men. And it all came from her working for J.P. Morgan. And she helped him amass this amazing collection. It was his private collection, meant to be shared with his friends, or he would go there to work or to just be around his books. And it was Belle who realized that this amazing collection that's now worth, I have no idea. I know 3 of the books are worth 1.5 billion. But she put that together because he was just haphazardly collecting before he brought her on. And so she built this for J.P. Morgan, and was living this fabulous life with her mother and her father. But what happened was that her father, as a civil rights activist, took his wife, Genevieve, and their young children, Belle wasn't born at the time, down to South Carolina, where he became the first Black professor at the University of South Carolina. Now, this was during Reconstruction. So they were there during this time of hope and all of this wonderfulness. And then the Civil Rights Act was overturned, and they came and said, we do not want this Black man here anymore. He stayed, but it was in the middle of the night when some friends came to them and said, you have to leave. The Ku Klux Klan will be coming for you. And so Genevieve was saying, okay, Richard, you have to go. You have to go. And their white friends were saying, no, they would come for you and the children too. And I think it was that made Genevieve say, she didn't make a decision at any one point in time, but when they left South Carolina under the threat of violence, they moved to New York, and she just gradually started moving the family. They lived in a white neighborhood. The children went to white schools, and they looked white. And she just started, and finally she put them on a census as white. And her father protested. The family split apart. Well, he left the family, and then they began to live as white. And this is the story of how Belle, because she was in her teenage years when that happened, and it was the story of how Belle now navigates this new life, working with J.P. Morgan and never telling anyone that she was Black.
You know, it was just incredible, because even just being darker complected, people would ask, and it was my Portuguese grandmother, wasn't it? Yeah,
yes,
that was what it was.
They put a name because her name was really Belle Marion Greener. Mm-hmm. And then when her mother put her on the census, she gave her and her brother the middle name DaCosta, to explain their dusky complexion, to say that they had a Portuguese grandmother.
So you here in this historical fiction, you have a character that really there has been a great deal written about him, J.P. Morgan. There have been specials on every imaginable channel, History Channel and everything else. So it was probably a little easier to get into his mindset and motivations, though yes. It's always hard to step into somebody else.
Yes.
But how did you navigate this? How much could you find written on Belle? How much could you find that gave you the way to have an insight into how she would have reacted, how she would have responded? Because historical fiction has got to be tricky.
Yeah.
You're filling in a lot of blanks. And how do you navigate that, trying to stay true to a truth, but you're going to be taking poetic license with it.
Yes, because especially with Belle, she burned all her letters. She did not want to be discovered. We believe, we don't know why she burnt the letters, but we believe it was because she did not want to be discovered, it to be discovered at all, that she was Black, because she didn't want to mess up the legacy of the Morgan Library, which was public at that point because of her. The only reason we know of a J.P. Morgan Library is because of Belle DaCosta Green. And so there was very little information on Belle, because they didn't even find out that she was Black until like the 80s or 90s, when somebody was doing a biography on J.P. Morgan. And they were trying to write a complete story on J.P. Morgan. They knew about Belle DaCosta Green, who was his confidant, and that's how people knew. But so there was little really ever written on her. There's one definitive biography called An Illuminated Life, and that came out in 2007. So what we did was we read the biography, as much as we could, and that gave us a good feeling of who she was. And so based on the fact that she came from both sides of her family, very prestigious, her parents educated, from there, we drew out what we thought she would be like, what we thought she would say. I had to use things that I knew about people who passed and how their families felt about them, and how passing was such a dangerous thing for people to do, because you could be lynched for it. It was considered a crime. And so how you couldn't share, once you decided to pass, you could not go back. You couldn't live in both worlds. You had to just stay there, which is why she never shared the secret with anyone else. And so all you can do, even with the J.P. Morgan, because we have a lot of dialogue in this book, we're telling a story. All we can do is, we know the real situations that happened, but none of us were there. There's no camera, there's no recordings. So all we could do was say, okay, we know he interviewed her for a job. We know the day he interviewed her for a job, and we know she got the job. We don't know what happened in that interview, but based on what we know about both of them at that point in time, we can imagine. And that's the fiction part that comes in, but we try our best to stay true to who we believe they were as characters or as people.
So, Belle in this has the most incredible mind. She truly does. And her knowledge of art and literature and historical works is just off the chart. How did you, that is a very hard thing to, how did you even know what facts to pick, how to write that? Because there's a lot of research that had to go into speaking authentically, because that's her complete conviction in that she understood this world and these things, I'm sure was part of the reason that J.P. Morgan hired her. He saw that conviction and that knowledge in her, but that has to be a very hard thing to convey when that's not your background.
Yes, but history and the love of art was Marie's. So we were a perfect match in writing this book, because she didn't know anything about Belle and passing in the family and what they would say and how they would feel, but she knew a lot about the art. So this was a perfect wedding here, a perfect marriage, I should say, of writing this together. And you just, it is fiction. So we have that. That's a good thing. That's our role, because everything in here doesn't have to be fact. It's based on a true story, but we can just pick out what we wanted to do. Belle's love of art, though, came from her father. That part was real. she was the only one that really followed in her father's footsteps of being a librarian. He was a librarian at the University of South Carolina, and he was responsible for putting the library back together after the Civil War. It was a mess. Marie and I just had the honor of going down to the University of South Carolina a few weeks ago, and we were speakers at a series, a Richard T. Greener series, and they took us to his home and showed us the library. And so it's so interesting. He gave her this love of art. He gave her this love of rare manuscripts. She had met Bernard Berenson when she was 10, really, through the book she really did receive. And then to meet him later in life and to become his lover. They will tell you tons about, if you're ever with the police, put your hands up on the wheel and things like that. There's another talk that goes on all the time. And I remember, my parents telling me this, and I was just like, that's not fair. But my mother told me that you are Black in this country when I was a little girl. And she said, you're going to have to work 3 times harder. You're going to have to be 3 times better so you can be considered equal. And I remember all through my teen years saying, that's not fair. Why can't I just work as hard as everybody else? And they were like, no, you have to work 3 times harder. And so some of those scenes where her mother would say late at night, we're going to sit down and do that, I drew on my own experiences where my parents just, the word's not beat, but just put inside of me that I had to work harder. I was going to have to work harder because I was Black, and that was just a fact.
And that is conveyed so strongly in your book. To write about somebody who's that much of an expert in a field where you're not, to me, that would intimidate the crap out of me. But you did it so well. But the fact that she has 2 strikes, she's Black and she's a woman, and to be able to succeed, she knew she had to be so much better than everyone else. Because otherwise, there's no one who's going to take a chance on a woman and would never take a chance on a Black woman.
Never.
So even just being a woman, trying to even do that was a seeming impossibility.
Yeah.
You've alluded, you and I alluded earlier to this, but I'd love for you to talk our readers through what is it like to write a book with somebody? Because it's hard to imagine how that works effectively without that. So how does that work?
I know. One of the things I'm so proud of is that if you read this book, you can't tell that it's written by 2 authors, can you? Mm-hmm. And we wrote every word together. I had done collaborations before with another author, Rashonda Tate Billingsley, and Marie had never done any collaborations before. And that was one of the things that she said she thought about and was attracted when she found out that I had written collaborations. And so Marie is an attorney, and she's used to flow charts and how is this going to be done? And I'm so the opposite when it comes to that. Like, I don't believe in flow charts. I don't even believe in deadlines. I believe they're just a suggestion. I'm trying to make one for the end of this week, but I'm really trying. And so with this collaboration, I told her that there's no rules. We just find our way. And so how we wrote this book together was we discussed every chapter before it was written. So we would take 5 chapters at a time, and we knew where we wanted to start the story because the story was going to be about J.P. Morgan and Bell. So we could tell her backstory throughout the story, but we weren't going to start there. We weren't writing a cradle to the grave. It was about her with the J.P. Morgan, and we did want to take it to the library becoming public because that was her greatest achievement. In fact, next in 2024, Morgan is going to be doing a big celebration, important because they were the only segregated Ivy League school at the time. And it was very important that she came to J.P. Morgan on a white platter. He would have assumed she was white, of course. She worked at Princeton, where Woodrow Wilson was the president of the university at the time, and before he became the president of the United States. And so we talked out every chapter. And then, depending on what the chapter was, one of us would take a stab at writing the first draft of that chapter. So if it was more about Belle and her family and who she was as a person, I would write the first draft. If it was about the art and the history and some of the travel stuff, then Marie would write the first draft. And then, so we would, divide up those 6 chapters, 3 and 3, and then we would switch the chapters. And then I'd go through her chapters and add in what I thought should be added or take out, and she would do the same. And it was really great because we really have different strengths. Because Marie had written historical fiction before, so she knew the language and everything. I've been writing contemporary fiction. So there were times when I wanted Belle to say to JP, "What's up, dude?" And that didn't work very well. So then I would say that Marie would go in with her historical fiction brush, her magical brush. But then there were other times when Marie would, like when she and Bernard, when Belle and Bernard first went to, I forgot where they were, but in Europe together, in Italy together. And the first time they were there, Marie put them in the room and then just closed the door. And I was like, oh, no, we need a little bit more than that. And so I would go in and write that part. And then so we wrote the entire book that way. It was like the best thing ever. And then when we got to the edits, we did the editing, every word together. And you're absolutely right about sometimes you have to do this, but that's why not every 2 writers can't write together. You need a writing soulmate. You need someone who you'll be able to trust, because sometimes you're going to say, no, we're not doing it that way. Or this is what we have to add, or this is what we have to take out. And especially, we didn't have that a lot in the Personal Librarian, but in our second book, which is about the friendship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary Mcleod Bethune, and people know who Eleanor Roosevelt was, but Mary Mcleod Bethune was the most powerful Black person in the country from like the 1920s, 1930s, and we had to push each other. There was a scene I wrote, and Marie called me up and she said, Eleanor cannot talk to Mary that way. And I was like, oh, yes, she can. Yes, she can if they're friends. Stop protecting Mary, because that's what Marie wants to do for me. She tries to protect me, and you can't. And I had Mary in the book say, Eleanor, you can't protect me from racism. I know you want to. So it is, you have to have a kinship. Is the only, it's a soul, she's my writing soulmate, because we can push each other. We can tell each other no, we can get annoyed and angry, but because we're talking about race all the time, and a Black woman and a white woman never get this kind of opportunity, we have become sisters.
That is absolutely incredible. Now, I got to have you tell me a story that's also about your next book. So sorry, everybody, but I think it's still wonderful how it was about something that happened in that book that, we're talking about microaggressions that happen all the time, things that are always happening that are just, unconscionable, but they happen to people of color in this nation still all the time.
Yeah.
But it had transpired in the book. And,
we had
how you resolve that, because she had a very, your edits kept changing because she kept wanting it one way.
Yeah, this was an interesting thing, because we're able to work on one document together. So the second book, because it's Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary Mcleod Bethune, we did write it differently than we wrote this book, but still did the same thing. Every time we wrote a chapter, she wrote Eleanor, I wrote Mary Mcleod Bethune, but every time we wrote a chapter, we switched it. We wrote it together in one document so we could see it. So in the beginning, and it's not giving away too much of this book, but in the beginning of this book, which I adore because it really pushes the limits, there's a situation that really happened where Eleanor Roosevelt and her mother invited Mary Mcleod Bethune to a luncheon with all these other women from around the country who were involved in education and educating women. And Mary was the only Black person there. And the women would not sit down and eat with her. And so Eleanor was horrified. Mary sat down and ate the soup. And so Eleanor sat down with her, and that's where their friendship was forged. That's a true story. So we don't know what they said, but we can imagine what they said. So then about 6 months later, there's a scene that I wrote where where Mary is now at a big party with James Gamble, who was the president of Procter & Gamble. He was a benefactor for her college. And so I had written the scene, and then when I went back in, and then I crossed it out. But I didn't call her because I couldn't figure out why was she putting this in and why was I taking it out? I needed to understand it myself first because I can't say you just can't, because I said something's happening here. We've never had that situation. She put in the same exact line and I took out the same exact line. And we did it like 4 times, never happened. And she must not have noticed. I think she just thought, oh, Victoria keeps messing this up. But I noticed that she was taking it out. She was putting it in. So I thought about it. I spent days thinking about it. And then I realized what it was. It had happened 6 months later. Mary wasn't thinking about some people who had done something to her 6 months ago. Between that day and the day that she was at this party, 6 months had passed. And so she had at least 1,782 different microaggressions happen to her. And she did not have the luxury of focusing on any one of them, because as Black people, it happens so often that we just have to let it roll, or else we will be drowning in bitterness and anger. But for Marie, even reading about that situation that was real and then writing about it, like, it's so heartfelt how horrible Eleanor feels. And I know that that's Marie's feelings. That was a defining moment for her. She couldn't let it go because she just thought it was so horrible that somebody wouldn't sit down to eat with someone because she was Black. But Mary had situations where the Ku Klux Klan had marched on the school. She built a college. And they marched on her school, and she had to stand in the middle of the school so they wouldn't burn it down. So that little thing of the women not wanting to eat with her, that was just another day in the office. But it was a defining moment for Marie. And when I called her up and I said, and we talked about it, she was like, oh my God. And I was like, because she said she would have never forgotten that. And I said, but you have the luxury to never forget that because it didn't happen to you. You got to watch it from the outside. But if I held on to every single thing that happened to me, I couldn't do that. And so that was a big aha moment for two people who had worked so closely together, who now talk about everything. Our personal lives, our families are all involved, with each other. It was shocking to find out that there was something so different between us.
And thinking about this, we've also talked about there were so many things that I don't think you saw that were going to come from, unintended consequences from this book. When you're writing it, you're trying to write an engaging book that brings these people to elevate this person. What are some of the unexpected consequences for you and for Marie that have come from writing this book?
Well, now one of my best friends is white. So, isn't that I can now say that, because, the cliche, some of my best friends are Black, but now one of my very dearest friends in the world, the person I probably speak to the most, the person I can cry with, is white. And it is important because everybody would assume that Marie has learned more from me. But I've learned so much too, because that situation that I just described, I don't think I had ever sat down and wondered why I didn't think about what happened to me 6 months ago until I was forced to do that. Another situation with Marie is if I didn't have this close relationship with her, I would have never understood how white people didn't see racism, because it happens every day. But it doesn't happen. It happens in micro aggressions every day. The way you see, and you and I spoke about this, the way you see racism is when John Lewis and everybody's walking across the bridge and they get beaten to a pulp and dogs are put on them. Or the George Floyd. You have to see the big situations for you to see it. And I get that now. And that's why I think these kinds of discussions are so important. So that's one of the things that came out of it. Also, when people see Marie and I together, and I wish we could have been here speaking, so I can't wait till we can come back with the next book together. So when people see us together, and we did not know this is just us, everyone says, we want what you have. There was one, we were in Washington, D.C., and a man came over. He had listened to us speak. He came on the line for us to sign it. And it was a white man. He said, I'm really scared, but I'm going to find some Black people to read this book with. He said, because I want what you have. And we were in South Carolina, and people came up to us and said, where can I find one of you or one of you? Or it's wonderful. And we've discovered the hunger that, as divided as this country seems to be, and I believe we are, there's so much of a hunger for us to come together. And that was something I didn't expect, and I'm so happy about. And now it makes me and Marie think about our books a little differently. We still want to write stories, but we're on a mission, because our books provide a safe place to talk about race. People always say we need to have a national conversation about race. And I always thought that was the dumbest thing people could say, because what are we all supposed to do? Call an aide? And I always say, please don't start the question with, I hope this is okay, which is what I hope this is okay, or I hope this doesn't sound stupid. And nothing is stupid. You don't know. So just ask. But I had somebody ask me she said, I always want to say the right thing. And I told her, well, since none of us get a chance to do that all the time, just always say the right thing from your heart. It may be the wrong words, but it'll be the right thing if it's from your heart. And she said, so should I call you African American, Black, colored? She said, because when she read The Personal Librarian, she was confused. And so we talked about that. We talked about a very funny situation where Marie and I were working with our publicity team at Random House. And we were using the word African American, and a very young, she must be in her 20s, maybe in her 30s. And she said, I don't think it's African American. And she's white. And she said, I don't think it's African American. And we're like, it's not? And, and she was like, no, I think it's Black. She said, because you never hear African American lives matter. And since that moment, I've been using Black. So
how funny, it's interesting. Again, a different perspective on that.
Since that moment, I've been using it. So all of these different consequences. And what I loved about that moment was he was a young white person on the publicity team who felt comfortable enough saying that to me. And I was opening up. I have not used African American since, because she's right. And so all of these discussions and all of these places we can go together, and realizing that we can both learn, it's not just one way. Because at my age, and I know you don't think I look old, but I'm like not that far from 70. And so
Oh my God.
no. And
What?
yeah. And so I can learn that, wow, I've never seen a sign that said African American lives matter. I think it is Black. And so it's just been wonderful that the opportunity to have those kinds of discussions, to really listen with your heart, to be able to talk freely, and to provide people with a safe place to be and to talk about race has been amazing.
Especially books. We were talking about libraries, museums. Hopefully places like that are considered safe, but sometimes exploring a topic through a book allows you to have a different conversation. And I know that you have just taken the world by storm with this book. There are so many people who want to talk about it, but have you felt that the book and the enormous reaction from the public to the book, is that changing how you're writing or what you want to write, the direction of your writing?
Yeah, I will always write historical fiction. Never say never, but there are especially with what Marie and I are doing now. So every 2 years, we will have a book together. And like, we've already signed our contract for our third book. And we're sitting here. The conversations we have now, because we were talking about, okay, I said something to her about Black trauma, and she didn't know what that meant. And so she was like, okay, so our third book is going to be very important. You see, we have to, and so those kinds of conversations are just, I'm in heaven. But for me, I will also be writing solo books. And I'm staying in historical fiction, because if we hadn't written about Bethune, I was like 8 years old when I found out about Mary Mcleod Bethune. And she was like, I'm absolutely sure she was the first famous person I knew. And I knew she was famous because she had passed away. You know what I mean? I didn't even really know what passing away meant, but she was no longer on earth. So that made her famous. And so my parents I had a set of World Book encyclopedias, and my father had gotten us also a Black set of encyclopedias. It was just all about Black history. And I remember the first person I wanted to look up was Mary Mcleod Bethune. She had 3 names. I didn't know anyone else who had 3 names, even though now I have 3 names. And she had her own college. And so I'm so shocked that people don't know about her, but I'm so thrilled that through this career that I have, that I love, because writing is my passion. I wouldn't be able to breathe if I were not able to write every day. I have to write every day, and I get it out, and it's good. I'm going to be able to help people discover these such important figures. So it is totally that one book changed my life.
That is amazing. If we don't, we always say here, if you don't understand the past, you can't understand the present. And I just learned something that I had no idea. You said there were encyclopedias dedicated to Black history.
Yeah. Okay.
I put everybody, and so they didn't let any of us of this skin color know those were out there. I'm just saying. And
so remember, you're way younger than me, but remember when they used to go around and sell the World Book encyclopedias? And
yes.
Yeah. And so my parents have both passed away. I wish I could find out but it was a whole set.
Wow.
And my sisters have them. And so, of course, they're way outdated, because encyclopedias were outdated the moment that they came into your house. But it was a set of, and my parents, I'm just so happy they had that foresight, that they felt that we needed to have that as well. We grew up in a predominantly white community, and I think they were very focused on making sure that we had Black history. But we grew up in such a liberal white community that we had a lot of Black history.
And growing up in the South, because I grew up in Florida, let me tell you, and the thing is, it's our history.
Yes,
it's all our history, and all of us should have known it.
That's a good
all point. Of us should have known it.
Yeah,
and that's what these books can shine lights on places that were totally dark before, and can bring them out. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to be really polite and I'm going to start looking at the chat because
Okay.
I'll be in such big trouble if I don't get to some of the questions.
Okay.
Let me see if I can look at a couple of them. Then if I have time, I'll get back to some of my other ones. So Susan had asked, how did you go about getting an agent?
Oh, I had an agent. So I've had an agent since my first novel, thank God. So I got my first agent in 1998.
Wow.
And I know it's a long time ago, right? And so I was thinking the other day, I've been a writer longer than I ever was anything else in my life. So if I couldn't do this anymore, I'm in trouble. But what I did was I knew that not all agents read all things or represented all people. And so I had written my novel Temptation, and my best friend, who's a writer as well, we went into a bookstore and we looked for books that I thought were like mine, because I figured, we had talked this out, we figured that if a book was like mine, that was books, and then we put them, and it was so scientific. This is what your MBA will do for you, because we got these 16, and then I put them in order of the top agent. Now, how I define that was based on what I thought about the book. So if, depending on where I thought the book was, I didn't have any other data, I had my own. And so then I listed them, and then I cross-referenced it with a book at that time that was called The Writer's Guide to Literary Agents. I'm sure it's still out there, but the name may have changed. And so with each of those agents, I read where to send the manuscript. Now I had a finished book, but where to send it and what to do. And so I sent it to the top, what I thought were the top 4. And I sent it express mail because I wanted instant gratification. And I'll never forget this, because I sent it on a Thursday to arrive on a Friday. And that Friday I was watching, and I sent it to the first top 4 because I was going to send 4 at a time. And the next day I was watching Oprah, and it was 4:00 in California, and somebody called, and I was like, really? Somebody's calling me during Oprah? You know, we didn't have caller ID or anything then. And I answered the phone, and it was an agent. It was one of the agents I had sent it to. She said she had read the first 50 pages to tell her more about myself. And so I was like, wow. And it was one of the top 4 based on mine. And so she told me she would call me back on Monday. She would use the weekend. Well, then that Sunday was Super Bowl Sunday. And so this is really telling you how old. Well, I told you when it was. This was when we had dial-up internet. So if you were on the internet and the phone rang, it kicked you off the internet.
Oh, yeah.
The phone rang, and I was like, really? You're going to knock me off the internet? Hello? And it was another agent, Victoria Saunders. Wow. She and I are still friends. And so I ended up working with Denise Stinson, and I tell everybody that story. And I've had at least 5 people come back and tell me they've gotten an agent that way.
That's because you want somebody who's going to believe in your stories and in your writing style. And I think particularly, being somebody who is getting in, and this is, you've been loving writing all your life, but you've had it.
Yeah, and we thought we were smarter than everybody. So we thought that we were going to just publish the books and keep all the money. And then we found out self-publishing was really hard. So that's, we decided I would go with see if I could go with the mainstream, and it worked out.
And it did for you. Karen O'Connor had written a question that you actually had answered it, because she was wondering about the writing process and how that works with 2 authors, because a lot of people.
And we have a lot more books to come. So
I cannot wait. And everybody, if you do have other questions, please do put them in. Jerome Spears, who is actually one of our wonderful descendants, hello Jerome, had put a comment in. Great discussion. Thanks for sharing. As you pull more narratives out of and he put a smiley face, what new direction might your future writing efforts take? Now, you talked about, of course, wanting to stay with historical fictions.
Yeah.
Do you want to stay with a woman's perspective? I didn't think to ask that.
That's a very good question. And I think I do not because I want to, but I think that's because what the readers want. Because, Belle DeCosta Green's father was so fascinating. He deserves a book of his own. But I'm nervous. I think people want, and I think my editors think people want to hear about women more as well. We haven't decided totally what our third book is going to be together, but my first solo historical fiction is going to be about a Harlem Renaissance editor. She was the editor to all of the famous Harlem Renaissance writers. So she discovered Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and Nella Larson, who wrote Passing. And so she was everyone's, if you had a favorite writer during that time, she was their favorite editor. And she got lost, she got erased from history. She also wrote the very first novel ever about Black middle class. All the novels before her, and I'm reading it now, all of the novels before There Is Confusion, that's the name of it, was if it had a Black character in it, they were a slave, or it was a slave narrative, or something. This was the first time a book had ever been written about Black people in the middle class. And in fact, she had a hard time getting the book published because I've read the letters that she got back. They were saying, one publisher actually said, this book doesn't make sense because Black people are solving their problems like white people, and that doesn't happen.
Wow. Ruth has an interesting question. She said, after this experience, is it lonely or freeing to write a novel solo?
That's a good question. Because I've written all of these. I've written 30 novels solo. But I miss Marie every time I write solo. So there are good parts and bad parts. The bad part is I miss her because you get to talk out everything. You're not by yourself. So you get to discuss the chapters. You have somebody to say, this is not working, or you have somebody to push you, or you push them. And so when you're by yourself, you don't have anyone to talk to about it. But the good part is that, so now I can just write. So when I'm writing a solo project, I write faster than when I'm writing with Marie.
Which makes total sense. But then if I was writing them much faster, then I would personally start second guessing myself. That would probably be my thing.
The only reason I think I don't second guess myself is because I've written 30 novels.
Exactly.
So I think that may be the only reason.
Meredith had a question about how inspirational was it when you visited the J.P. Morgan Library?
Oh. Again, talking about seeing things through other people's eyes. So Marie had been there for years doing in JP Morgan's office. And there was a painting behind his desk. I think it was called The Portrait of a Moor at that time. I don't know if they changed the name. And so she looked at it. She saw the portrait a million times. And through her eyes, the man had always been white, and because of the context, where it was. And then when I said it, she looked, and through my lens, she saw a Black man. So we went and looked this up, and it was really interesting. A couple of things were interesting, and we actually worked it into the book. Where Belle, we found out the real thing is that Belle acquired this, that thing in 1924, 1925, I think I'm remembering. So it was after JP Morgan. But the picture looks a lot like her father. And so we were thinking that she purchased it because she was the one that purchased it. And it's right behind JP Morgan's desk. He had already passed away. And the two most important men in her life she brought together that way.
That is just amazing. Do you think you're going to try to continue to make a connection to place and your writing when you're doing historical fiction when you can? Because it has to, even when we're here and we see people walk into the slave cabin and they feel that emotional connection to a sense of place. Do you think that will be something you may try to use again in your historical writing?
Yeah,
To visit a place?
it depends on what we decide to do, what the stories are. But that's another good question, because clearly that place really, and that was such a great question, because it inspired us. And when people go to the museum, when they read the book, and then they take the book with them, and then they send pictures, they post pictures on social media of them posing in the museum. One of the things that they love is that they said they felt like they were there. They knew where everything was because of the book. And so we always try to go to the places. So, for example, with Mary Mcleod Bethune, I flew down to Florida and Daytona Beach and walked through her house, so that when I was writing those scenes, I was in the house, so the reader would be in the house. I heard the floor creak. I saw the china that's on the table that Eleanor Roosevelt gave to her. And then she has a house here that's not furnished the way her house in Florida was, but I walked through the house, and there was a scene that Marie had written. I said, I don't know if it could take place that way. So she flew in from Pittsburgh to go to the house. So I think those things are very important, because especially if the houses and the grounds were important to the character. Yeah. So I can't wait to come there, right? I just cannot.
I cannot. I'm like, I got to get you.
No, I can't wait. I just cannot wait.
Oh my gosh. In fact, Jan had asked, and I know you are, but she said, are you aware of the connection of J.P. Morgan and Sotterley? And
yes, but because of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's watching tonight, I think most of you do know, of course, the last family of owners, Herbert Satterley's wife, Louisa Morgan Satterley, was the daughter of J.P. Morgan. And it is their daughter, Mabel. That's what I keep hearing. Now, I wanted to ask, have any descendants of the characters ever reached out to you?
Yes. So, well, not directly. So I'll start with the JP Morgan side. We did a small virtual presentation, Marie and I, for the board of the Morgan Library, because they've been wonderful to us. We, when we went there, and then we were selected as a Good Morning America book club selection when the book first came out. So that was an unexpected consequence. Who knew that was going to happen? And we were on Good Morning America with Deborah Roberts, and we actually did our interview in the JP Morgan Library. So I know it was just, if you get a chance, go watch it on YouTube. It's kind of like cool. Like I was actually on Good Morning America.
I'm doing this as soon as I get off.
Right in there.
Wow.
But I forgot the question now because I got carried away.
No. We were just talking about that red room connection and everything else that you have with that. And it just, it's really amazing when you have those kinds of connections, and we're going to get you down here. We're going to get you down here, and you're going to see that.
I can't wait.
And you were talking about descendants, though. You were talking about J.P. Morgan's descendants.
Yeah. Okay. So we were on a call with the board. That's what I was talking about, but the board. And it was a very small group. And there was one man who was elderly, and we knew he looked like he was in his 90s, but very, sprite and everything. And he just kept saying, this book was so good. It was a hoot. And every time he said it was a hoot, I said, that's not quite what we were going for, but okay. He seemed to have enjoyed it. So they were all individually talking. And then when he got here, he was like, Marie and Victoria, this book was a hoot. And so we were like, okay. And he said, but you got two things wrong. He said, Anne was much nicer, and Jack was so boring. And so we were like, okay. Well, we found out that was J.P. Morgan. Jack was this man's grandfather. So how many great?
Oh my God. Okay.
So that was fun. But at least so he liked it. He said it was a hoot. Now that wasn't quite, we didn't have a lot of chuckles in the book, but okay. That would be a very dangerous thing. That was one of the consequences, not just from them, but of people who passed. You did not know what your child would look like. And so you could not assume that if just because you're married to a white person and you're fair, you could not assume how your child would look. So Belle didn't have children. Her older sisters didn't have children. We do not believe her brother had children, but her youngest sister, Teddy, did have children. Teddy never lived life as a Black person, and she was like the fairest. She was blonde and blue-eyed. And so she had a son. Teddy had a son who she was married. That husband died in World War I. Teddy had a kind of nervous breakdown, and so Belle and her mother actually adopted that son. We had it in a book. Yeah, we had it in a book and had to take it out because it was a whole nother story. And then her sister Teddy remarried and had one more child named Belle, a little girl she named Belle. And when we were writing a book, we found out that Belle died in 2005. So we were like, oh man, it's just ended. Well, the historian who contacted me said that she was in touch with that Belle's two daughters and that she loved the personal librarian and she was going to give it to them. And she said that she was sure that they would love it.
Oh my gosh. I hope you get a conversation with them someday.
I would love to.
That would be amazing. And that point that so many people would never have thought about, that you were not, well, even just getting married could be extraordinarily tricky because you're going to delve into backgrounds and what are you going to find? And how do you go there? And but as you said, you never know what generation back, and you don't know what was going to happen.
You couldn't take a chance. And so a lot of people having children was something that had them all on edge.
So I think that if you felt this, I did have one more question. I'm looking at the time. I'm like, dang it, I probably have time for one more. But if you had one takeaway from the Personal Librarian. Now, and I loved your comment though about, I think I actually wrote it down because I loved it so much. Whatever they need, they take from the pages.
Yeah.
And I do love that. But what I love about this book is I think it can take you to a place that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
It can make you look at something that maybe you didn't before. And if there was any kind of takeaway that you felt like you hope somebody gets from this book, besides just a connection and seeing a side of a person that was hidden from history, hidden from our lives, is there any takeaway you'd love for people to have from this book?
In the beginning, that's all I wanted. I was just writing this book about Belle de Costa Green. And then as we were doing the editing, race in this country erupted around us. And I realized this book was about more than her. It was about race and how the past is connected to the present and what can we learn. And the thing that I want the most out of this book and out of our next book and out of the next book and out of the next book is what we've talked about already. I do want us to start having this national conversation about race that I used to laugh about and say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I do want people, because I've been given such a gift to be able to have Marie in my life this way. To get to see the world through another lens, and she gets to see the world through mine. And I want to pass that gift on to everyone. And the safe place to start is with a book, and to find a white person or a Black person or a book club to read it with. We're actually looking for a way to make that happen nationally. We're actively working on that right now. And so that's what I'd like people to walk away with. If we can put one friendship together, if we can get people to understand one thing, and it might seem something mundane, like I'm thrilled to know that I'm Black. I was thrilled. So that was so, not only was I thrilled to say, okay, that makes sense, because I could have never answered before. But to have what I love even more was who told me and how she told. I just want all of that. I had no idea that was going to come from Belle DaCosta Green's book in the beginning, but that's what people have taken away.
And, you know, from books, we always love to be transported. We of course, we love that sensation of reading a book and getting so caught up that everything else fades and that's all that you're seeing. We love that moment. It's always great learning new facts, but when we can see a new perspective.
Yes.
And if that perspective can change the way you're even looking at your today, how much more impactful is that?
It really is. It really is. I've been given this gift, like I said, and I just want to spread it around a little bit because it's so freaking cool to have this.
Oh my gosh. I could go on all night. I really could. I cannot wait to get you here.
I cannot wait.
We're going to make this happen. I need to get you and Marie here. We need your next book. We need to be able to make this happen. So everybody, you heard me saying it tonight. We're going to find a way to make this happen so that you all can continue this with us. But what an honor. I am so thrilled that you could be with us tonight and share your incredible insights, your perspectives, share you and how you've helped to create this work that's inspiring a lot of people and connecting to so many lives. We are so deeply grateful.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm the one who's honored, and to be here with you, that's an honor for me. But, you know, Marie and I get all the credit, but this is clearly Belle DaCosta Green, because there's something about her that has drawn people in.
There it is. And to find somebody who beat so many odds, and not that she didn't pay a personal price.
Yeah.
Because she absolutely did. Every day of her life.
Yeah.
She was paying a personal price to be able to succeed. And succeeding did not come without a cost.
And not without a cost. Yeah, there were so many sacrifices that she made.
But her imprint, we all need to go up to the JP Morgan Library now. And
everybody just go there. It is, and you know, people think of libraries and they think of like this huge building or something. This was his personal collection. Like if I had an extra 4 or 5 billion, I think I'd buy the building next door too, and kind of spread out my collection of books.
Oh my gosh. Well, I see everybody's saying thank you in the chat. To all of you who were with us tonight, I know that you are so glad you tuned in, and you can rewatch this. You'll get a link to rewatch it because there are going to be times I want to hear that again. And so you can rewatch it at any time. Victoria, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
And you had great questions. Thank you for doing it this way, because this was so much better for me. So thank you.
Oh, you are so welcome. And to all of you who are joining us, we do have one more event coming up November 2nd. This will be our first hybrid event of the speaker series this year. We're hoping we can do more of these next year. So if you can, you'll be able to join us virtually, but we can see you live as well. So you can sign up for either live or virtual. We hope to see many of you in November. It's going to be Don Shomat, and he is talking about his book, Anaconda's Tale, the Civil War in Southern Maryland. And there are all kinds of facts that you haven't seen before, so you have to join us. But for tonight, Victoria, thank you so much. My darling friend, who I'm going to call my friend now.
Yes, we are friends, because you did an amazing job. I need to take you on the road with me. So we are friends now. You're not going to get rid of me.
Oh, we're together. We're going to make this happen. And to all of you, thank you so much for joining us.